My alien roommate didn't let me out of the bedroom all night, and somehow it turned out to be a lot less exciting than that sentence makes it sound. When you tell people you share an apartment with a tall, glowing extraterrestrial woman who barely understands human customs, they tend to assume you're living every guy's fantasy. I used to assume that too. Turns out the reality is closer to being adopted by a very curious scientist who thinks your entire species is a mildly confusing science project. Her name doesn't translate into English very well. The closest sound is something like Cyril, which is elegant and mysterious until you realize she uses the same calm voice to discuss planetary physics and the moisture levels of my cereal. She's about a head taller than me, faintly luminous in low light, and moves with the kind of smooth confidence that makes it impossible not to notice when she walks into a room. If this were a different kind of story, that description would probably lead somewhere romantic. In my case, it mostly led to awkward scientific questions and several incidents involving measuring tape. As roommates go, she's technically perfect. She pays rent early, keeps everything spotless, and never eats my food because she considers Earth cuisine nutritionally reckless. The downside is that she observes things constantly. Sometimes I'll catch her standing in the hallway just watching me microwave leftovers like she's witnessing an ancient tribal ritual. Once she asked if humans inflated themselves before mating because she noticed my chest expanding when I breathed deeply. Another time she tried to schedule intimacy hours on the apartment calendar between garbage day and her remote research meetings. That entry got erased very quickly, but the memory stayed. So when she knocked on my bedroom door late one evening and spoke in that calm, deliberate voice of hers, I figured something unusual was about to happen. The door opened and she stood there holding a small tablet and a silver device that looked like it belonged in a hospital or a spaceship, which in her case were basically the same thing. "Human roommate," she said. "I require observation of nighttime behavior." There are sentences that can mean very different things depending on context. That one sounded promising enough that I didn't think too hard about it. "Observation?" I asked. "Yes. Extended duration." I stepped aside and let her in, trying to look casual while my brain raced ahead of the situation. You don't share an apartment with an attractive alien for months without imagining certain possibilities, and this sounded suspiciously like the beginning of one of those possibilities. At the very least, it sounded interesting. She looked around my room with professional focus before turning back to me. "Please lie down naturally." "Naturally how?" I asked. "As if preparing for reproductive rest cycle." That phrasing should have been a warning sign, but optimism is a powerful force. I stretched out on the bed, trying to look relaxed while she activated the device in her hand. A faint blue line swept across my chest, and she nodded with approval. Then I heard the door click behind her. I lifted my head. "Did you just lock that?" "Yes." "Why?" "Observation must remain uninterrupted." She said it with such calm certainty that I didn't immediately question it. Honestly, part of me thought the locked door made the situation feel more serious in a way that still seemed encouraging. Nobody had ever locked me in a bedroom before, but I was willing to stay open-minded about new cultural experiences. She stepped closer and held the scanner over my chest again. "Your heart rate has increased," she said. "That happens sometimes. Are you experiencing mating anticipation?" I hesitated just long enough to regret telling the truth. "Maybe." She nodded and tapped rapidly on her tablet. "Subject displays heightened reproductive readiness at onset of study." Something about the phrase, "onset of study," felt slightly less romantic than I'd hoped, but it still seemed early to judge. Maybe this was just how her species approached things. Different planets, different customs. She adjusted the device and pressed it lightly against my arm. "Remain still." "What exactly are you studying?" I asked. "Human nighttime behavior." "Specifically?" "Yes." That was not a helpful answer, but she seemed satisfied with it. After a moment she looked up again. "You will now attempt sleep." "Right now?" "Yes." It was barely past midnight, but I figured I could pretend. I closed my eyes and tried to relax while she moved quietly around the room, occasionally making soft tapping sounds on her tablet. The silence stretched just long enough for me to think maybe this really was going somewhere unusual but pleasant. Then the scanner beeped loudly near my ear. I flinched. She leaned closer, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "Pulse spike detected," she said. "You startled me." Reaction recorded. She typed more notes. I lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling. It was starting to feel less like a romantic encounter and more like a medical appointment that had gone horribly off schedule. Still, I told myself it might just be the early phase. Maybe the scientific part came first, and the interesting part came later. She looked down at the tablet again. "Initial readings satisfactory," she said. I tried to sound confident. "Good. Yes," she replied calmly. "We will continue for approximately 8 hours. That was the moment I realized I might have misunderstood the situation. Unfortunately, that was also the last optimistic thought I was going to have all night. The first 10 minutes passed in uncomfortable silence while I tried to pretend I was drifting off. Every time my breathing slowed, the scanner hovered an inch above my face like a mechanical mosquito. Just when I started to relax, the device chirped again. "Eye movement detected," she said quietly. "My eyes move when I sleep." "Noted." She tapped on the tablet again. The steady rhythm of her typing made it impossible to ignore the fact that this wasn't going to be a short observation. I shifted slightly on the mattress, hoping to get comfortable. "Movement registered," she said immediately. "Explain." I adjusted the pillow. "Discomfort?" "No. Just adjusting." She wrote that down too, as if pillow adjustments were a major anthropological discovery. A few minutes later she leaned close enough that I could feel the faint warmth of her skin. "Your breathing has slowed," she said. "You are entering rest phase." "Good." "Yes." The scanner beeped again. "Pulse decreasing." "That's normal. Primitive stabilization behavior." I stared at the ceiling and wondered how long this was going to last. The answer came sooner than I expected. 10 minutes later she gently shook my shoulder. "Wakefulness check." I blinked at her. "What?" "You must confirm consciousness." "I was trying to sleep." "Yes. Sleeping people don't confirm consciousness." She paused, considering that like it was a complicated philosophical problem. "Correction acknowledged." She typed again. I rolled onto my side and pulled the blanket closer. For a moment I thought maybe she'd let me rest. Then the scanner beeped. "Postural variation detected." "That's called rolling over." "Explain purpose." "Comfort." She recorded that with the same seriousness as everything else. Another 10 minutes passed. The scanner beeped again. "Respiratory irregularity detected." That was a sigh. "Cause?" "Exhaustion." She nodded. "Useful data." At some point she instructed me to lie on my back again because she needed baseline breathing patterns. When that was finished, she had me lie on my left side, then my right side, then back again. "Snoring probability analysis," she explained. "I don't snore." "Verification required." I closed my eyes and tried to sleep while she sat beside the bed watching me with professional intensity. Every time I got close to drifting off, she leaned in with the scanner. Eventually she tapped my shoulder again. "Vocal respiration event recorded." "That's not snoring. It resembles distressed animal." "That's called breathing." "Primitive," she said calmly. I rubbed my face and sat up halfway before remembering the locked door. "How long is this going to take?" "Until sufficient data obtained." "How much data do you need?" "Extensive." That was not encouraging. I lay back down again and pulled the blanket over my chest. A few minutes later she spoke again. "How frequently do humans consider mating?" My eyes opened slowly. "What?" "How frequently do you experience reproductive thoughts?" "That's not really nighttime behavior." "It influences nighttime behavior." I sighed. "Sometimes." She typed quickly. Frequency estimate required. I don't know. Approximate. I stared at the ceiling. Depends on the day. She nodded like that was a meaningful statistic. A minute later she asked another question. Do visual stimuli accelerate readiness? I turned my head toward her. You're asking that now? Yes. In the middle of the night? This is the middle of the study. I pressed my hands over my eyes. Yes. Clarify. Yes, they do. She entered more notes. Then she looked at me again with steady curiosity. Is roommate proximity stimulating? I hesitated. Yes. She nodded calmly and recorded it without reacting in the slightest. I realized at that moment my love life was being peer-reviewed. She didn't respond to that because she was busy adjusting the scanner again. I tried to relax and closed my eyes. A few minutes later I stretched instinctively, arms overhead. Display detected, she said immediately. I lowered my arms. What display? Extended posture suggests mating readiness. That was stretching. She wrote something down anyway. When I rolled onto my side again, she spoke instantly. Invitation signal recorded. That's not an invitation. Clarify intention. Sleeping. She paused. Unusual. The scanner beeped again. Then again. And again. Each sound made my nerves twitch a little more. Time stretched into a blur of interruptions, measurements, and questions that got increasingly personal while somehow remaining completely clinical. Eventually I swung my legs off the bed. I need water. She looked up. Study incomplete. I'm thirsty. I will provide hydration. She crossed the room, poured a glass from the bottle on my desk, and handed it to me like a nurse tending to a patient. Then she guided me back to the mattress. Resume position. I lay down slowly. The door remained locked. That was when it really sank in that I wasn't participating in a strange romantic evening, or even a mutual cultural exchange. I wasn't even really a roommate at that point. I was a specimen under observation, and the night was nowhere near over. By the time a few more measurement cycles passed, the idea of getting real sleep had completely disappeared. Every time my body started to relax, the scanner chimed or her voice cut through the quiet with another observation. She never sounded tired, never sounded bored, and definitely never sounded like someone who planned to stop. Meanwhile, my thoughts were slowing down in that hazy way that comes from being awake far too long. You appear less responsive, she said at one point. That's called exhaustion. She tilted her head slightly. Your exhaustion produces valuable data. Your research produces suffering. She considered that statement like it might be useful too. Emotional irritation increasing, she said, tapping the tablet again. At some point she dimmed the lights even further because apparently optimal observation required reduced environmental interference. The room took on a faint glow from her skin and the devices she kept activating. I felt like I was trapped inside a very quiet interrogation room run by someone who genuinely believed she was being helpful. The scanner passed slowly over my chest again. Muscle tension elevated. I haven't slept. Yes. That's why. She nodded. Human resilience notable. I'm not resilient. I'm trapped. She recorded that anyway. After another round of measurements, she turned the tablet toward me. Several graphs and lines moved across the display in bright colors that didn't mean anything to me. Preliminary analysis, she said. I don't want analysis. I want sleep. She pointed at one of the charts. Reproductive vulnerability increases after 3 hours without rest. I stared at the screen. That's not a thing. Data suggests otherwise. Data suggests I want a pillow and unconsciousness. She adjusted the display. Subject shows agitation response. Subject shows desire to escape. She typed that down calmly like it was just another statistic. Then she looked at me again. Extended cohabitation may increase bonding. If one of us survives. She nodded thoughtfully. Survival stress may accelerate attachment. I'm not attached. I'm desperate. She recorded that too. The scanner beeped again. Remain still. I've been still for hours. Verification required. She placed the device against my shoulder and waited while it emitted a faint pulsing vibration. Muscle fatigue confirmed. I could have told you that. Objective measurement preferred. I pressed my face into the pillow for a moment before rolling onto my back again. Another note went into the tablet. Voluntary compliance maintained. I don't have a choice. Yes. She said that so matter-of-factly that it almost sounded reassuring, which somehow made it worse. A while later she instructed me to raise my arms. For what? Resistance evaluation. I slowly lifted them. She pressed the scanner along my forearms. Minimal strength output. I'm tired. Expected. I lowered my arms again. She made another entry. Physical weakening corresponds with emotional openness. That's not emotional openness. That's sleep deprivation. She paused as if reconsidering. Clarification noted. Another test involved checking reaction speed. She dropped a small metallic object toward my hand and instructed me to catch it. The first time I missed completely and it bounced off the mattress. Reaction delay significant, she said. Try doing this at 4 a.m. She handed it back to me and repeated the test. I caught it the second time, barely. Improvement detected. I'm proud of me too. She didn't react to sarcasm, which made using it feel pointless but somehow necessary. At some stage I lost track of how many hours had passed. The room felt unreal, like everything existed inside a quiet bubble where time moved differently. Her voice stayed calm and precise no matter how frustrated I sounded. You are experiencing cognitive slowdown, she observed. I'm experiencing regret. Specify. I regret opening the door. She recorded that without hesitation. Eventually she began comparing my earlier readings to the current ones. Baseline enthusiasm reduced. You mean I'm not excited anymore? Yes. That's because this stopped being exciting about 6 hours ago. She nodded. Long-duration observation alters reproductive interest. Long-duration observation ruins everything. She seemed pleased with that answer. Then she stepped back slightly and looked over the data again. Your endurance is noteworthy. I'm not enduring. I'm surviving. Yes. She said it like that confirmed something important. My head felt heavy against the pillow and my thoughts drifted in strange directions. At one point I wondered if falling unconscious would count as cooperation or equipment failure. She noticed my eyes half closing. Alertness dropping. Good. Continue resisting sleep. I blinked slowly. Why? Need accurate threshold measurement. That sentence hurt more than it should have. Somewhere in the distance a car passed outside and for a moment I imagined normal people living normal lives with unlocked doors and uninterrupted sleep. The idea felt almost fictional. She checked the tablet again. Behavior becoming erratic. I think that's called being human. Your species demonstrates unusual tolerance. I don't tolerate this. I endure it. She nodded again and entered more notes. Around what felt like the deepest part of the night, my thoughts began drifting into nonsense territory where everything seemed faintly ridiculous. Even her calm scientific voice started to sound surreal. She scanned my chest again. Heart rate stable despite fatigue. I'm too tired to panic. Interesting adaptation. I turned my head toward her glowing outline. Honestly, at this point I'd welcome alien abduction. She paused mid-typing. You are already an alien presence. Not helping. She resumed recording data as if that exchange had answered something important. Somewhere around what had to be 4 a.m, I realized I was no longer even hoping the night would end soon. I was just waiting for consciousness itself to give up before I did. At some point the darkness outside began to fade into that dull gray color that means morning is getting close. I noticed it before she did because I had spent hours staring at the same patch of ceiling, and the slight change in light felt like a miracle. My body felt heavy and numb, like gravity had quietly doubled during the night. Even breathing felt like work. Meanwhile, she stood beside the bed scrolling through pages of data with the same calm focus she'd had 8 hours earlier. Eventually, she looked toward the window and nodded to herself. Observation period nearing completion. I let out a slow breath that probably sounded like another distressed animal noise to her equipment. Good. She checked the tablet again. Final measurements required. I didn't even argue anymore. The scanner moved across my chest one last time, then along my arms and neck. Each beep sounded softer than before, or maybe I was just too tired to react. Pulse stabilized at low activity level, she said. That's because I'm barely alive. Dramatic phrasing detected. I mean it. She recorded something anyway. Then she stepped back and studied the screen for a long moment. I watched her silently, too drained to ask questions. After several minutes, she spoke again in a tone that sounded almost satisfied. Study complete. A soft click came from the door behind her. The lock disengaged. I stared at it like it was the most beautiful object I had ever seen, but moving toward it felt impossible. Instead, I rolled slowly onto my side and let my feet hang off the mattress. Even sitting upright took effort. She didn't seem concerned about my condition. If anything, she looked energized. Results highly successful, she said. That's great. I tried to stand and nearly lost my balance before sitting back down. She began reading directly from the tablet. Conclusion 1. Humans require structured supervision during nocturnal cycles. No, we don't. She continued without pause. Conclusion 2. Confinement increases emotional bonding between cohabitating subjects. I rubbed my eyes. I feel emotionally bonded to a pillow. Attachment object identified. That's not what I meant. She kept reading. Conclusion 3. Humans respond positively to sustained observation. I stared at her. I responded with suffering. Emotional intensity indicates engagement. That's not engagement. That's misery. She paused briefly. Clarification noted. Then she resumed. Conclusion 4. Sleep deprivation enhances honesty during interpersonal discussion. That part might be true, I muttered. She nodded slightly, like that confirmed the entire project. Then she turned the tablet, so I could see the summary page filled with charts and notes. Lines zigzagged across the display in complicated patterns that supposedly represented everything from heart rate to what she called reproductive enthusiasm metrics. Your cooperation produced excellent data. I didn't cooperate. I gave up. Yes. She seemed perfectly satisfied with that distinction. Then she scrolled further down. One additional conclusion. I already didn't like the sound of that. Based on behavioral responses and physiological indicators, you are classified as an ideal long-term partner candidate. I blinked slowly. What? She looked directly at me. Compatibility rating above 90%. That's not compatibility. That's captivity. Extended proximity produced strong responses. Those responses were exhaustion. She tapped the screen again. Bonding indicators remained consistent. I shook my head weakly. You locked me in a room and interrogated me for 8 hours. Yes. That's not bonding. Data suggests otherwise. I leaned forward with my elbows on my knees, too tired to argue properly. What happens now? She answered immediately. Further research required. That sentence made my stomach sink more than anything else she'd said all night. How much further? She checked the tablet. Next study scheduled soon. How soon? Within acceptable recovery period. I looked up at her. What does that mean? 2 to 3 nights. I stared at her in silence. Duration extended for comparative analysis. I let out a weak laugh that didn't sound entirely sane. You know what the funny part is? She waited. I thought this was going to be exciting. It was productive. That's not the same thing. She made one last entry on the tablet. Subject displays humor response despite fatigue. I slowly pushed myself to my feet and shuffled toward the door. Each step felt unsteady, but freedom was only a few feet away. When I reached the hallway, the normal light and quiet felt unreal after the endless interruptions of the night. Behind me she spoke calmly. Recovery monitoring will begin after rest period. I didn't turn around. Please don't. Yes. I staggered toward the couch with the determination of someone who had survived something ridiculous and unnecessary. As I collapsed onto the cushions, one final thought drifted through my exhausted mind. If anyone ever tells you living with an alien sounds exciting, tell them to try sleeping first.